Kaylee, you have the floor.
Awesome. Hi, guys. So I'm just going to give you basically a quick rundown of our CBWM program, community-based water monitoring, and the 2020 results. So I'm going to start by acknowledging that the land that we live and work on and that this program is focused on is all part of the Ktunaxa traditional territory, more specifically the Kukinamakis, which encompasses our watershed. Sweet. So the goal of our community-based water monitoring program is to collect baseline data on aquatic habitat health and increase community water literacy. So our focus is to fill in gaps in watershed data by assessing the health of these tributaries, specifically non-mining affected ones, and to create opportunities for discussion. So currently we are looking at 10 sites across 5 of the major tributaries into the Elk. So that's Lizard, Alexander, Cole, Boivin, and Morrissey. And all of these sites were chosen because they're areas of community concern or contain good habitat that we would like to either monitor or preserve. In general, we place a location kind of above more of the larger disturbance on a tributary and one just above the confluence into the Elk to kind of get an idea of everything that's happening there. Perfect. So previously, the CBWM program used a combination of stream keepers and cabin, but in 2020, we switched to an entirely cabin-based program. So that's the Canadian Aquatic Biomonitoring Network. And these assessments are nationally recognized and standardized and are done in low flow conditions. So essentially, cabin uses a reference system approach, meaning that it compares your test or study site to a collection of reference sites with similar features, but that are in pristine condition. So it takes into account a bunch of different physical, chemical, and biological parameters that you're collecting and assesses your site, assigning it a condition in comparison to reference based on the structure of the benthic invertebrate communities. And then it spits out these community ellipses that you'll see in a moment. And they're bullseyes that kind of center around good health or a similar state to reference condition. And the further out from the center your site is, the more it's diverged from reference and the more likely it is that the site is experiencing some issues. Yeah, thanks. So Lizard Creek is one of our older sites, or sorry, one of our older locations. You can see that we have upstream and downstream sites there. They're both downstream from Island Lake Lodge, but primarily the creek just runs through the provincial park. Next slide. Awesome. So in 2020, both sites were classified as mildly divergent, but as you can see, there's been some fluctuation over time. We're not worried about mild divergence because the sites seem to experience stable fluctuations, so they're not becoming increasingly divergent over time. But we're still going to continue to monitor these sites, especially as potential new developments and roadways are increasing in that area. So these are our Alexander Creek sites. They're outside Sparwood. The creek runs parallel to the Crow's Nest Highway, and it passes by some local logging roads as well as a gun range. So both sites in 2020 were in reference condition. We have data for this area starting in 2012. So moving forward, it might act as a good baseline if the Crown Mountain mine development is approved and help to capture kind of some changes as they're occurring. Perfect. So Boivin Creek is one of our newer sites. It's up in the Elk River area. It was chosen initially because we wanted to kind of watch the effects of the artificial riprap that stretches along the large sections of the creek as it passes through town. Awesome, and as you can see, there are no major effects to the overall condition so far. It's only been studied since 2019, but both years that results are available for have the stream and reference condition. But we're obviously going to continue to monitor to understand the effects more long-term. So we started monitoring Coal Creek in 2019, which conveniently is the same year that all of the clear-cut logging began up there. So downstream is divergent. which is not surprising. The location is downstream of logging roads. There's historic mining up there, some cattle grazing, decommissioned landfill, there's ATV trails, and it meanders through a portion of town before coming to our downstream site. The upstream is mildly divergent. We're not currently super worried about that, but based on the 2 years of data, the sites appear to be trending towards increasingly poor condition, but with the fluctuations that we've seen at some of the other sites, it's kind of hard to say without more data. We're going to continue to monitor Coal Creek closely, and we're kind of, getting ahead of myself, but excited to see, well, not excited, interested to see what the 2022 results will show after all that flooding we just had. Perfect. So our Morrissey sites are our newest ones. Again, we've got an upstream, further upstream and more downstream site. So the downstream is divergent, while the upstream is in reference condition. We also weren't super surprised by these results due to the active logging, recreational trails, again, some historic mining up there, cattle grazing, farming. And again, we're just going to need to kind of wait for more data collection to establish whether this is a major concern or whether it's part of a fluctuating pattern. So starting in 2020, we took part in a trial for the STREAM program, and we continued it in 2021 and hopefully will again this year. It's not currently part of cabin analysis, but it uses DNA to kind of allow you to look at the taxa present to a finer resolution. So this means you're looking at maybe species or genus rather than family. It's great for scouting specific invasives. In 2020, our downstream Boivin site tested positive for the presence of tubifex, which is one of the host species needed for whirling disease to establish. The disease isn't currently in BC, but as you can see from those lovely red areas on the map, it is in neighboring areas of Alberta. And tracking this host species could be beneficial in determining what areas might become more high risk if the disease were to enter this watershed. Perfect. So part of our CBWM program includes taking some traditional water quality measurements, and we have them going as far back as 2012. pH basically looks at how basic or acidic something is. Water tends to be close to neutral, but in the Elk Valley, where we have limestone-based local geology, the water has a higher pH, but it's always consistently been between BC limits for aquatic life. So our temperature graph here shows some fluctuations. Our low flow monitoring is done between late August, but can go all the way until the beginning of November. So fluctuations are kind of to be expected with such a significant time frame for sampling. But it is nice to see that it always stays within the critical limits for our beautiful West Slope cutthroat trout. So dissolved oxygen is important. Because like us, aquatic animals need oxygen to breathe, and a higher content means that it'll be easier for them. Our dissolved oxygen readings have fluctuated slightly over time, but they don't drop below the BC water quality long-term minimum. Turbidity measures the ability of light to pass through water, and it's usually a result of sediment in the water. High turbidity levels can cause all sorts of issues. The sediment can suffocate fish, their eggs. It can make it hard to see. It can fill in the holes in rocks or between rocks that the benthics live in. But if you look at our data, all the readings remain relatively low, with 3.5 NTU being the highest measurement. And water quality guidelines are only concerned if that fluctuates by more than 8 within 24 hours or 2 for 30 days. So we also measure, chemical parameters as part of cabin. So we're looking at metals and nutrients. We didn't see any exceedances, nothing out of the ordinary suggesting any issues. But in 2019, aluminum rose. We're not sure why. It was specifically exceeded water quality guidelines at the upstream site. It's settled out for 2020, but we're going to continue watching this. Obviously, in a mining area, selenium is always a major concern. None of our sites are directly affected by current mining operations. And as you can see, all those levels stayed below the freshwater aquatic guidelines. And they are much lower than the selenium values you would see if there were any major mining influence. This example here is a graph showing the concentrations measured in the Elk River main stem near the outflow to the Koocanusa, which have surpassed BC water quality guidelines and are still on the rise. And for comparison, that little red box down there is our non-mining affected streams, and they have similar levels to what was seen in the elk back in the 1980s. Perfect. So for future, we're going to continue monitoring to create some long-term data sets. We've got plans to expand the program based on the guidance and recommendations from our newly established Elk River Watershed Collaborative Monitoring Program. We've already been looking at kind of current cabin site locations for areas that are maybe lacking some monitoring. And like always, we'll continue working on your concerns. Perfect. And I just want to thank you to all our beautiful volunteers. Obviously, none of our work would be possible at all without you guys. And then thank you to our CBWM funders and partners. Perfect. Thanks, guys.
And yeah, before the community forum, we just have some time for questions for Kaylee on this presentation. So if you want to write it in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself, or if you're in Facebook land, feel free to write a comment.
Glenn Hutton owns some recreational property up on right beside Tech's Coal Mountain operation in Corbin, and just wondering if there's any way that I can get my family involved with doing some monitoring on Michelle Creek and or Corbin Creek. We've noticed especially there's lots of calcification in Corbin Creek just before it enters the Michelle. And you know, we've got some concerns, and instead of just protesting, we would like to actually get some data and feed it into your program if that would be appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we always love when people can come and volunteer. In terms of what areas we're looking at, I guess Chad might be a better person to answer that.
Sure. Hey, Glenn. Yeah, absolutely. So what we're trying to do with the collaborative monitoring program is gather up all of the different silos of data that already exists out in the watershed in various companies and government departments and whatnot. Once we've finished looking at that, we'll figure out what data we actually don't have versus what data we're just not currently aware of. And then we're hoping that following that, we can start rolling additional sites into our CBWM program based on the need for understanding. And Michelle Creek is definitely one of the more high priority watersheds and catchments in the area. To date, we haven't been doing cabin on Michelle Creek simply because the level of mining, so the government mandated mining sampling that's already required should be sufficient to get a good understanding of the health of that stream. So what we need to do now is actually look at that data a little bit more closely, double check that there's not any gaps in the information that we currently have, and then we'll proceed from there to include it in. But in the meantime, if you can send us an email to follow up, we can definitely get you involved in some more water sampling and looking at sort of more granular details on Corbin and Michelle Creek.
Okay, great. Yeah, nephew and his wife had been doing took the training course a year ago.
Yeah, I remember that. I was on that course as well. Yeah. I've been meaning to get in touch with them for a while now. Yeah.
Yeah. So we, and I've been up there since I was 5, which is a long time. And although tech's pulling, shutting things down, with all the talk of North Coal and the 2 mines that they're going to potentially open up in that same watershed, plus all the raping and pillaging that was at Cam 4, Cam something that's, literally tearing that watershed apart. Getting increasingly concerned about not only the fishing water, but drinking water as well. So we'd like to get involved, so keep us in mind, please.
Yeah, no, definitely reach out to us, and I think I'll be speaking. Is it Sarah?
Yes.
Yeah, I'll be reaching out to Sarah soon. We've been meaning to catch up once this year sort of starts to slow down, but with COVID, it's been a bit difficult to do an in-person meeting, but we'll get onto that sometime in the next month.
Perfect. Thanks very much. Thank you.
We have a question in the comments that I'll just read out. It's, how would you summarize the overall health of the areas that you've been monitoring? Any areas of concern to identify? Areas of positivity to mention? Just some general thoughts on your results. Thanks. Thank you, Josh.
Thanks. I think, personally, I think overall, our sites are looking pretty good. Coal Creek and or the lower Coal and the lower Morrissey are considered divergent, but I think it's hard for us to say a whole lot about them until we have kind of more longer term data sets. But with the amount of things that are kind of going on in those locations, we're definitely keeping an eye on them. Alexander Creek, I was kind of excited to see that was in reference condition for both sites. Yeah.
All right, and Kate Mussett, you have your hand up, so I'll just ask you to unmute.
Hi, Kate.
Hi. Anne actually had her hand up first, so I can wait until after if you want to go ahead.
All right, Anne is part of the team, but I guess that's very kind of you.
Okay, I'll go ahead. I'm really excited that this is happening in our community, and I can't wait to be back and help out more. Start of summer for good.
Nice.
So just because I've been doing a lot of very similar work here on the coast, and I've been really appreciative of cabin and stream methodology, but also questioning it, especially in terms of the reference condition model. I'm just curious if you have or have plans to consult with community or with Ktunaxa Nation members about the validity of that reference condition and things that may have been left out from this baseline, so to speak, because there's definitely been a big disconnect between the data that comes out of the mine and how our community feels about the state of the watershed. So that's my question. Thanks. Great job.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, definitely. We've just kind of got into cabin, really got into it the last handful of years. But I know when I was looking through data, I'm trying to understand all of the, everything related to these reference sites and how they compare to our sites a little better. So work in progress for me. But yeah, definitely part of our, the whole collaborative monitoring program that we're hoping to get started is that committee and those groups will kind of look into things like the validity of this and hopefully give some recommendations.
Awesome. Thanks.
All right. I'm going to have Anne go ahead. I'll ask you to unmute.
Thanks. So yes, I'm part of the team. Nice to meet all of you. I'm still very new to cabin myself though. And so I was just wondering, very simple question, Kaylee, can you just explain when you do these ellipses, so the 3 categories, chemical, physical, and invertebrates, they get all calculated into the elliptical result, so to speak?
Kinda. So basically it uses habitat variables to put your site, to categorize your site into which reference sites it would fit in with. And then it uses the structure of the benthic communities, kind of your site compared to those reference sites to build those ellipses.
Okay, so chemical and physical parameters are not included in the elliptical
Some
graph.
of the some of the stuff you're collecting for cabin is also so that you can kind of dive into it, because cabin will tell you if something's wrong but doesn't tell you what's wrong. It hints at it with those benthic communities, so it's kind of up to you to dive in further.
Okay, thanks. Interesting, thanks.
All right, and up next we'll have Clayton. I'll ask you to unmute, please.
Thanks, Kaylee and the Alliance. I really appreciate what you guys are doing here. It's really good stuff. So thanks for the presentation. I think your answer to Anna kind of clarified some things for me, but maybe I'll just reiterate. I was just trying to think if you go to a stream that's already pretty heavily degraded, like, is the cabin, I'm not familiar with the cabin system, so be patient, but can it adequately quantify that it's already degraded, or do you kind of start with where you're at? I guess I kind of understood that it looks at the habitat conditions and it compares it to the reference, so it should be able to account for that already degraded reference. Is that right?
Yeah, it should be able to. It depends on the model, what habitat variables they use. And we're also in the process of switching between two models because they've updated our area. But yeah, it should be able, like, the purpose of cabin is that you should be able to do it at some randomly degraded site, and it'll tell you that whether it is or isn't degraded. But yeah, again, that's based on how well it can match your site to some reference sites.
Yeah, like all things is probably imperfect, but sounds pretty good and seems like a powerful system. So yeah, thanks you guys, appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks.
And just on that note, like, because the cabin involves all these parameters that we're collecting, we're getting data from all of these different parameters, so we can look at them individually as well. So if we find that we don't see any benthic invertebrates that we know are bioindicators of good quality water, that whether or not we see a divergent or non-divergent cabin result, like an ellipses result, we nonetheless have that data to go off of, and we can investigate further in more detail. Yeah, and then we have a question actually from the comments on what divergent actually means.
Divergent, it's basically just saying how different it is from the reference site. In terms of the benthic communities that you would expect to see if the site were pristine.
Okay, excellent. Thank you everybody for the wonderful questions. It's really great to hear your engagement. So we're going to move on to the community forum section of this, and I'll just explain how this is going to work. So I have just sent a link to you in the chat and on the Facebook in the comments as well. So if you go to that link, you should go onto basically a slides with 3 slides, and each of the slides has a question on it. So we're going to go through one by one. So if everybody could kind of stay on the same page. So the first question is what values do you associate with the river? So just click into a square and answer. There's no wrong answers. By values, we mean anything that you yourself value about the river. It can be intrinsic, such as just its beauty, or it can be more specific, such as fishing. Okay, we got beauty and high quality water. Recreation, kayaking and foraging, life, wildlife, excellent fishing, and yeah, drinking water for the community and wildlife, absolutely. Yeah, excellent fishing. Recreation opportunities, totally. Agriculture benefits. Mm-hmm. Play, yeah, totally. Core of indigenous worldview, yeah, totally. Support for economic development, fishing, rafting, forestry, agriculture, and mining. Mm-hmm. Family time, that's nice, yeah. All right, these are beautiful. Thank you so much for writing them in. We're going to move on to question number 2, and that is, what are your main concerns regarding Elk River health? We have a lot of mining and selenium related answers. Too much agriculture, too much tourism, erosion and flooding, loss of bank protection from forestry, clear-cut logging, cumulative effects. Runoff and turbidity. Yeah. Lack of knowledge. Mm-hmm. Wildlife impacts. Future development as population increases. Loss of, yeah, fish and benthic habitat. All right, let's move on to question number 3, and feel free to, if you have an idea for the previous slides, feel free to hop on in there. Question 3 is, what actions would you like to see Elk River Alliance take in the next 2 to 3 years, specifically to answer questions that you may have about Elk River health?
And this applies to all facets of our programming. If you have a certain stream that you think is in trouble or that needs to be monitored that isn't being looked at, definitely let us know about that. If you've got a particular interest on the watershed that you don't feel that we've addressed properly yet, definitely put that in there as well. We're looking for community input into how our programming is developed and how our programs are developed and what projects we should be focusing on. So this is really your chance to push us to move in different directions or strengthen our position on areas that we're already looking at.
Okay, so we have continues to stay vocal in local political scene, improve local, regional, and provincial policy to manage and protect the river and watershed, strengthen watershed protection, habitat protection and creation, bioremediation, groundwater data, and education of youth, more monitoring, work as an advocate for the river health, take action on the selenium disaster, continue monitoring, gain support from industry and mining. Why is there such an elevated level of selenium closer to the Koocanusa? And yeah, I actually, yeah, sorry, I did see that comment in the chat. And if anybody wants to correct me, feel free, but the presumption is that it is mining related.
That's very safe to say.
Yeah.
And it's actually higher closer to the mines.
It is.
Yeah, so the question, why is there elevated selenium closer to Koocanusa? That's just that graph and data set there was just one we used so that we could show that there was what the water quality is like further downstream. Like Randall says, yes, it's more likely that it's higher further upstream. And that's the selenium levels in the Elk River as a whole, not on any particular tributary. So the Elk River is accumulation of all the tributaries that run into it, plus groundwater influence and whatnot. So yeah, that is a good question of why is it so high all the way down the river. It is mining related for the most part, and almost entirely, and that's being looked at by a range of government and not-for-profit groups that we hope to see some additional information coming out over the next year or so with the collaborative work.
Okay, it seems like everybody's kind of finishing up. Yeah, we've got some really great answers in there. And we really appreciate your input into this. This is really helpful in helping us guide what we do, and you know, or continue doing what we do. So now the time has come for prize time. I'm going to put up this wheel of names. And if you don't see your name in there, comment it down in the comments of the Zoom or in the Facebook comments, and we'll throw it in there. Isn't this exciting? We're missing AM. All right.
They're there.
Okay. We got. All right. Hi, Chris.
Evgeny, what's the prize?
The prize is a Gear Hub little goodies bag. Actually, I did have a picture of it. It's one of these. It's not all of these things. It's one of these things, but still very exciting. All right, I don't see anybody else commenting, so we're gonna go ahead and roll that board. All right. Congratulations to Ron's iPad and presumably Ron as well. So Ron, if you could perhaps send us a message, you can contact me at yevgeny@elkriveralliance.ca, or you can just contact info@elkriveralliance.ca and let us know when you'd like to come by and pick it up. We're working from home right now, but we can meet up with you at the office. Our offices are 1111 2nd Ave in Fernie. So yeah, let us know when you'd like to come grab your little Gear Hub goodies bag. And thank you to Gear Hub for providing it. I'm really grateful. With that, I would like to thank everybody for attending. We're really grateful for your community support, for attending our results, and caring about the Elk River watershed health, and for weighing in on what you think is important, what you're worried about, and what you'd like to see the Elk River Alliance do. We'll hopefully be having more of these webinars in the future. You can find out more information about our CVWM program on our website, elkriveralliance.ca, where you can also find links to volunteering and to donating. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you when we see you.
And if you have any further questions or want some more information, or you've got some input you'd like to speak with us privately, drop us a line at info@elkriveralliance.ca, or our other email addresses are on the website as well. We're always keen to talk. We always want to hear your input and hear your concerns. So definitely let us know if there's anything else you want to talk about. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Keith.